close your eyes, and let the gentle darkness fold around you. The world outside is still there, the distant hum of traffic, unfinished tasks, lingering worries that you have not yet set down. But right now, none of that matters. Let it drift away, like waves pulling back into the sea. All that remains is you, your breath, and the story I am about to whisper. Tonight, I will take you back to ancient Greece, back to a time when gods still walked upon the earth, when the sky stretched endlessly blue, and the Aegean Sea sang its eternal lullaby. Beneath the hazy moonlight, we will meet a god whom mortals have always spoken of with fear, Ares, the god of war. But do not be afraid. This journey does not lead you into blood and fire, nor into battlefields of clashing swords. Instead, we will listen to another tale, the hidden one, woven beneath the red armor of Ares, a tale seldom told, of loneliness, of the yearning for love, and of rare moments when war falls silent, leaving only the slow breath of the night. Imagine yourself standing upon a wide Greek meadow, where the wind carries the scent of wild grass and the salt of the open sea. Above you, the sky is dusted with silver stars, each one a tiny lantern glowing against a violet horizon. Far away, the great peaks of Olympus rise, veiled in a soft blue mist. That sacred mountain is where Zeus thunders his lightning, where Hera sits upon her golden throne, where Athena watches humankind with her wise gaze. And there too, in a shadowed corner rarely spoken of, lives Ares, burning and alone, like a quiet flame in the dark. Do you hear it? Beyond the shore, the sea murmurs steadily, wave by wave, like an ancient clock, like the heartbeat of the universe, unhurried and eternal. That rhythm of the tide will be the music of our journey. Now and then, the wind seems to carry voices, the faint whispers of warriors long at rest. But do not fear them. They do not call you to battle. They are only singing the lullabies of Greece, cradling you closer to dream. Sit now by this imagined shore. Before you, Ares appears. He does not roar, nor brandish his spear. He is only a tall figure clad in bronze, gleaming softly under the moon. But his eyes, strangely, are not aflame. They are quiet, heavy, and distant as the night sky itself. In this moment, Ares is not war. He is only a weary spirit, aching for the warmth Olympus never gave. Tonight, you and I will listen to his tale, from the fire of his birth, to his lonely marches across empty fields, from his secret love for Aphrodite, to the echo of wars carried in mortal dreams. And finally, we will see him lay down his armor, standing alone before the great sea, searching for peace in the silence of the stars. But there is no rush. Take a long, slow breath in, and gently let it out. Let your heartbeat align with the distant rhythm of the waves. Let your eyes grow heavy, your shoulders lighter. I will tell this story, word by word, like drops of water falling into a still pool. Each word will carry you farther from the noise of the present, and closer to the gentle realm of sleep. In the beginning, before the world of men had found its rhythm, before the first ships sailed across the Aegean and the first marble temples rose from the earth, There was only the breath of gods. The sky belonged to Zeus, heavy with thunder. The hearth belonged to Hestia, warm with eternal flame. The earth trembled beneath Poseidon's restless trident. And in that divine order, there stirred a force that would one day take shape in bronze and shadow, the force of war, waiting to be born. Ares was that force. He was not born in silence. His arrival came like a spark that set the horizon aflame. Hera, Queen of Olympus, held him in her arms for the first time. And even she felt the strange tremor that passed through the world. His eyes glowed red like embers still hidden under ash. His small fists clenched as if ready to grasp a spear that was not yet forged. And though he was but an infant, his cry rolled through the mountains like a battle horn, scattering flocks of birds across the skies. But alongside that cry, there was also a hush. For even in his most fiery beginnings, Ares carried solitude. His brothers and sisters were greeted with feasts and laughter. Apollo with his golden lyre, Artemis with her silver bow, Athena with her shining wisdom. Yet for Ares, there was unease. The gods looked at him and saw not a child, but a storm. They saw the shape of future battlefields in the outline of his shoulders. They saw the shadow of spears and shields when his small hands reached out. Still, a god cannot choose his essence. Ares was fire, and fire consumes. He grew quickly, taller, broader, his voice deepening like the roll of thunder behind distant hills. The armor he wore as a boy gleamed too bright for the eyes of mortals, though it was forged only of light and dream. He wandered Olympus restless, a young god with nowhere to belong. There were moments, though, when he stood still. He would climb the cliffs at the edge of Olympus, where the clouds parted and the whole of Greece spread out below. Villages like tiny clusters of stars. Rivers winding like silver serpents through the dark valleys. The sea breathing in long, endless sighs. And he would stand there, silent, watching. No one knew what he thought in those hours. But sometimes his eyes softened, and it seemed, for a fleeting instant, that the god of war was simply a boy searching for a place in the world. Zeus, his father, did not speak much to him. The king of gods had storms to command, judgments to cast, and thunderbolts to hurl. Hera, his mother, watched him with pride shadowed by worry. For she knew that the fire she had brought forth could warm or destroy. She whispered lullabies in his early years, though they were heavy with prophecy. You will march, my son, across lands of men. You will taste their cries, their fears, their desperate prayers. But may you also find rest, somewhere beyond the clash of shields. And so Ares grew, each day carrying more of that restless flame. He walked through Olympus with the heavy rhythm of a drumbeat, and gods turned their eyes away. He was not cruel, not yet, but he was untamed. He was the spark in dry grass, the storm that had not yet broken, the silence before 1,000 swords would sing. In the nights of his youth, when Olympus grew quiet and the halls of the gods fell still, Ares wandered into dreams. He dreamed of fires rising against the horizon, of men shouting his name though they had never seen his face. He dreamed of armor glowing like the sun and of rivers running red. But he also dreamed of things no one expected, of warm hearths in small villages, of children laughing in meadows, of lovers holding hands beneath olive trees. His heart was both the battlefield and the cradle, both the roar of thunder and the sigh of the sea. Perhaps that is why mortals, long before they built temples in his name, felt him in their bones. When a hunter clenched his spear against a wild beast, the shadow of Ares was there. When a farmer defended his home with nothing but a rock, the breath of Ares stirred in the air. He was not yet worshipped, not yet cursed, but his essence moved unseen, like fire beneath the earth waiting to break free. And still, the boy god grew. His stride became heavier, his eyes sharper, his heart both hungrier and lonelier. For in Olympus, no one embraced him the way they embraced others. Apollo had the warmth of the Muses. Athena had the endless admiration of mortals who prayed for wisdom. Even Dionysus, chaotic and wild, was met with laughter and wine. But Ares was a silence in the feast hall, a name whispered in caution, a presence that unsettled rather than soothed. And so he walked alone through the golden corridors of Olympus, alone across the high meadows above the clouds, alone under the pale moon, where his shadow stretched long and restless. Yet loneliness is also a fire. It burns quietly, shaping the soul in ways unseen. And as the years turned, Ares learned to carry his solitude like a hidden shield. He did not beg for belonging. He did not bend to gentleness. He simply endured. A god forged not by joy but by endurance itself. One night, as he stood at the edge of the world, the sea below roaring with silver waves, Ares clenched his hand and for the first time, a weapon appeared. It was only a shadow at first, a spear not yet solid, but it shimmered with the promise of what was to come. The wind hissed through the mountains, carrying the echo of future battles. The boy had taken his first step toward becoming the god of war. But listen carefully. Though his spear glowed, though his eyes burned brighter than flame, there was still a softness lingering within him. Ares looked not toward conquest but toward the stars, as though asking them a silent question: am I only this? Only fire? Only fury? Only war? The stars, ancient and silent, gave no answer. They only shimmered faintly, 1,000 lanterns swaying above his head, their light mingling with the fire inside him. And in that mingling, Ares stood, both divine and vulnerable, both feared and forgotten, both the storm and the boy still yearning for peace. Thus the fire was born. Thus Ares began his long march through eternity, not only as a god of battle, but as a soul bound forever to both rage and longing. And as the waves continued to murmur below, and the wind carried whispers through the night, the story of Ares moved onward, into the lonely steps of his youth, into the echo of a march that would never cease. The boy who had once stood at the edge of Olympus, gazing at the stars with questions burning in his chest, was no longer a boy. Ares had grown tall and broad, his shoulders carrying the weight of a destiny no one had asked him to choose. His bronze armor no longer shimmered like a dream but rang with the hard truth of war. And yet, beneath the gleam of that armor, the same solitude still lingered, unchanged, unbroken, like a shadow bound to his spirit. Each day on Olympus, Ares walked the golden halls, his heavy steps echoing like distant drums. The other gods laughed, feasted, sang. Apollo's music danced across the chambers, Dionysus spilled wine in waves of revelry, Athena sat surrounded by wisdom and strategy, her mind sharp as polished steel. And Ares moved among them like a ghost. He was there, and yet apart. A figure too fierce to be embraced, too restless to sit still. His presence unsettled even the immortals. And so, often, he was left alone. And so he marched, alone, across the high fields of Olympus where the clouds curled like rivers of milk. Alone. Down the slopes where olive trees swayed in breezes no mortal could feel. Alone. Under the silver moon that spread her light across the Aegean, painting his shadow long and dark. This was the lonely march, not of soldiers across battlefields, but of one God pacing endlessly through eternity, seeking a place that would never quite welcome him. Sometimes, mortals glimpsed him. Farmers toiling by lantern light felt a chill at their backs, as though a tall figure had passed silently through the mist. Shepherds heard the echo of armored footsteps in the hills. Long after the flocks had gone still, they told tales by the fire of the nameless stranger with blazing eyes who crossed the land at dusk, leaving no trail but the sound of marching in the wind. And though they feared him, they also pitied him, for there was no laughter in that march, only a rhythm heavy and sorrowful. At times, Ares sought refuge by the sea. He would descend from Olympus in silence, his armor dimmed to shadows, and stand upon lonely shores. The waves lapped at his feet, steady, eternal, whispering secrets in a language older than gods. He would listen for hours, the wind tugging at his cloak, the salt stinging his lips. In those moments, he was not the god of blood and fury, but a solitary wanderer, searching the horizon for something he could not name. It was then that he realized war was not only about fire and steel. War was also about silence, the silence that comes after the clash, when the battlefield lies still and the air is thick with smoke. It was a silence he carried inside him, even in peace. A silence that followed him with every step, yet the march never stopped. Even when he closed his eyes, even in the stillness of dreams, the rhythm continued. He dreamed of endless roads stretching into twilight, his own figure moving forward, always forward, but never arriving. He dreamed of fields where no voices called, only the sound of armor against stone, armor against sand, armor against the earth itself, always walking, always alone. The other gods did not understand. They saw his restlessness as danger, his solitude as threat. Zeus thundered commands, demanding that Ares find his place in the great order of Olympus. Athena, wise and sharp, looked upon him with a kind of disdain, as though his fire was nothing but waste. Even Hera, who had once whispered lullabies to him, grew distant, her eyes clouded with worry at the sun who seemed made of storms. But Ares could not change what he was. He was the march itself. The endless beat of feet upon the earth. The steady rise of tension before the storm breaks. The loneliness that comes when no one dares to walk beside you. Still, there were moments of tenderness hidden in that march. When he passed through mortal villages at night, unseen, he sometimes paused by the flickering glow of hearths. He listened to laughter from inside the walls, the sound of families sharing bread, the soft murmur of children slipping into sleep. He never entered, never revealed himself. But for a moment, he let the warmth wash over him, a reminder of what he would never truly possess. Then, with a sigh like a falling star, he turned away and continued on. The march stretched across centuries. The landscapes changed. Temples rose and crumbled. Empires bloomed and fell. Still, Ares walked. His armor grew heavier with time. Not from use, but from memory. The clink of every chain, the ring of every blade, seemed to linger within it. A chorus of ghosts. Each step carried the weight of all who had fought, all who had fallen, all who had dreamed of victory and woken instead to silence. And yet, despite the burden, Ares never faltered. His stride was tireless, his gaze unbroken. For though his march was lonely, it was also eternal. He was the god of war, yes, but he was also the god of persistence. He was the flame that never died, the drum that never ceased. He was the march itself, moving forever forward, carrying the solitude of ages in every step. So if you listen, late at night, when the world grows quiet and your own footsteps echo softly in the dark, you may feel it, the faint rhythm of another march, not your own. The whisper of a god passing near, unseen, yet ever present. Ares, still walking, still searching, still bound to the lonely road. And as the night deepens, his figure fades into the horizon, the sound of his steps blending with the hush of the sea, the sigh of the wind, the slow beating of your own heart. The march continues, not to frighten, not to conquer, but simply because it must. Because that is who he is. The lonely march of Ares, eternal, unbroken, and in its rhythm, strange as it may be, there is a lullaby, the lullaby of footsteps fading gently into night, carrying you deeper into dreams. The march had been long, and the nights had been endless. Ares, who had carried solitude like a shield, finally stumbled upon a light that pierced the gloom of his existence. It was not the light of battle, nor the glow of fire across a dark horizon. It was the radiance of a goddess, Aphrodite, the embodiment of beauty, of desire, of the tenderness he had never known. She was not like the others of Olympus, where Athena's wisdom cut like steel. Aphrodite's presence softened the air, where Hera's gaze was heavy with judgment. Aphrodite's eyes shimmered like water under the moon. Ares had walked centuries with no companion but silence. And then suddenly, there she was, laughter in her lips, warmth in her skin, a promise of something beyond the march. Their meeting was not told with thunder or spectacle. It happened quietly, as most fated things do. Ares had returned from a long wandering along mortal shores. His armor muted, his heart heavy. He found her in a grove where roses climbed the marble walls and doves fluttered from branch to branch. She was seated upon a stone, her hair cascading like rivers of gold, her fingers trailing across the petals of a flower. When her eyes lifted, they met his, and in that gaze, something broke inside the god of war. No armor could shield him from her smile. No spear could defend against her voice. When Aphrodite spoke, the restless march inside him stilled. If only for a moment. They met again, and again, in secret, in the meadows of Olympus, beneath veils of mist, along the silent shores where the sea whispered endlessly to the stars, in hidden chambers where torchlight flickered upon bronze and ivory. Each time, their hands found each other more quickly, their voices softened into murmurs only they could hear. Ares, who had never known belonging, found it in her touch. Aphrodite, who had been given in marriage to Hephaestus, the god of fire and forge, found in Ares a passion that burned brighter than the flames of any forge. And so their love unfolded, dangerous, forbidden, intoxicating. Hephaestus was clever, inventive, but his limbs were twisted, his presence plain compared to the fierce fire of Ares. Aphrodite's heart, drawn to beauty and desire, was never truly his, and though she was bound by law and oath to the smith, her spirit wandered into the arms of the warrior. In their embraces, Ares forgot his solitude. He forgot the endless march. Her fingers traced the scars he bore, not of flesh. For gods do not wound as mortals do, but of spirit, of years unloved and unwelcomed. She kissed those invisible marks as though they were sacred. Her voice soothed the fire within him, and for the first time in eternity, the god of war knew peace. But Olympus is not a place where secrets stay hidden. The gods are ever watchful, ever whispering, and Hephaestus, with his mind sharpened by jealousy and craft, began to see the truth. His wife, the goddess of beauty, spent too many hours away. Her eyes glimmered with a joy he could not give. Ares returned from wanderings with a glow that no battle could explain. So Hephaestus, cunning and bitter, laid his trap. With threads finer than silk but stronger than iron, he forged chains invisible to the eye, unbreakable even by gods. He draped them across the bed of his home, weaving them in patterns too delicate for even Aphrodite to notice. Then he waited. The lovers came, as they always did, their voices hushed, their laughter spilling like wine. They lay together in each other's arms, speaking softly of dreams, of secret futures where no chains bound them, no laws tore them apart. But as their bodies intertwined, the snare closed, the invisible chains sprang to life, wrapping around wrists and ankles, binding them together in a cruel embrace. They struggled, but the more they fought, the tighter the bonds grew. The god of war, whose strength shook mountains, could not break them. Aphrodite, radiant and divine, could not slip free. They were caught, trapped in the very act of their love. And then the laughter came, not their own, but the laughter of Olympus. For Hephaestus called the gods to witness his vengeance. One by one, they gathered, Apollo, Athena, Poseidon, Hermes. Their eyes fell upon the bound lovers, upon Ares and Aphrodite entangled in chains. Some jeered, some mocked, some smirked at the humiliation of the mighty god of war caught helpless, of the goddess of love exposed in betrayal. The hall rang with cruel amusement, and in that ringing, Ares felt a wound deeper than any blade had ever given him. His fire, once fierce and proud, smoldered into ash. He had known loneliness, yes, but never such shame, never such helplessness. Beside him, Aphrodite wept silently, her beauty dimmed by sorrow, her lips trembling though no words came. And so their love unfolded, dangerous, forbidden, intoxicating. Hephaestus was clever, inventive, but his limbs were twisted, his presence plain compared to the fierce fire of Ares. Aphrodite's heart, drawn to beauty and desire, was never truly his. And though she was bound by law and oath to the smith, her spirit wandered into the arms of the warrior. At last, Poseidon, who had grown weary of the mockery, demanded their release. Hephaestus, though reluctant, obeyed. The chains fell away, clattering like broken laughter against the marble floor. Ares rose, his face shadowed, his eyes burning with a fury too heavy to unleash. Aphrodite gathered her veil, covering her tears with silence, and though they walked free, the chains had left their mark, not on their bodies, but on their hearts. Their love did not end that day. Desire does not vanish because of shame. They met again, though more carefully, more cautiously, always looking over their shoulders for unseen eyes. And each time, their embraces carried both the sweetness of longing and the bitterness of betrayal remembered. For they knew now that their love, however divine, was fragile. It was a flame burning against the wind, beautiful but always at risk of being extinguished. And so Ares marched on, no longer entirely alone, but never entirely free. Aphrodite was his comfort, his fire, his only refuge from solitude. Yet she was also the source of his deepest wound, the reminder that even love could be shackled, mocked, and bound in chains. Still, he clung to her, as she clung to him, both of them caught between passion and sorrow. For in a world of gods where perfection was demanded and rules unbroken, theirs was the love that bled, the love that stumbled, the love that could never fully rest. And so the god of war, who had once known only the lonely march, now knew another rhythm, the rhythm of chains, of whispers in the dark, of kisses stolen between shadows. Love had come to him, yes, but with love had come pain, and with pain, the certainty that even gods cannot escape the weight of longing. As the night deepens, imagine the sound, the faint clink of chains, the sigh of lovers bound by both desire and fate, the hush of waves outside Olympus carrying their secret into eternity. Let it lull you, not into sorrow, but into dreams, for every chain is also a lullaby, every forbidden embrace another verse in the song of sleep. Love had wrapped Ares in warmth, and chains had scarred him with shame. Yet neither tenderness nor humiliation changed the truth of his being. He was fire. He was the march. He was the shadow that fell across the earth whenever men raised their weapons. And though he longed for Aphrodite's embrace, though he wished for rest by her side, his essence stirred elsewhere, called forth by the endless cries of mortals. For war is not chosen by gods alone. It is whispered first in the hearts of men. And every time a mortal heart turned restless, every time a hand clenched a spear, Ares awoke. His eyes, burning like embers, opened across plains and valleys, and the echo of his presence moved through the world. The first time he descended after his entanglement in chains, it was to a battlefield where no god had been invited. Two tribes of men clashed upon a dusty plain, their cries tearing through the sky like storms. Ares appeared not as a towering giant but as a shadow, moving among them. He whispered into ears already trembling with fear, and those fears turned to rage. He brushed his hand across the blades of spears, and they gleamed sharper, thirstier. He did not shout. He did not command. He simply was. And that was enough. His essence magnified theirs, turning their terror into frenzy, their hesitation into violence. And when the battle ended, when the plain lay silent with the stillness of death, Ares remained. He did not mourn, not in the way mortals did, but he listened. He knelt among the fallen, touching the cooling ground, hearing the whispers of souls leaving their bodies, and in their final sighs, he heard something unexpected, not curses, not hatred, but longing, longing for home, longing for love, longing for peace they would never hold again. It struck him, as it always did, that war was never only blood and conquest. It was also yearning. It was men crying out for the things they feared to lose. It was fathers defending sons, lovers protecting one another, friends standing shoulder to shoulder against the dark. And in that yearning, Ares felt himself reflected. For was he not also a soul of longing, bound forever to a destiny he had not chosen? So he walked the empty field, his shadow long across the corpses. And for a moment, he was not war itself, but the echo of sorrow war left behind. The echo that hummed in the air long after swords had grown quiet. And so it went, again and again. Where men fought, Ares came, sometimes unseen, sometimes blazing in full armor, his voice a thunder that shook the hearts of soldiers. In Greece, in Thrace, in lands beyond the reach of olive groves and marble temples, his presence moved like a silent wind. To some, he was glory, the spark that drove them to fearless acts. To others, he was terror, the weight that crushed their will. To all, he was inescapable. But though his essence fueled battles, his soul remained restless. He would retreat afterward into solitude, the cries of men still echoing in his ears. He heard them in his dreams, voices overlapping, countless and ceaseless. Some cursed him, begging for release. Others called to him as if he were salvation, a shield against despair. He carried them all, and they clung to him like chains unseen, heavier even than those Hephaestus had once forged. In these moments of stillness, Ares stood between two truths, that he was feared, and that he was needed. Men despised the bloodshed, Yet they summoned him with every act of violence. They prayed for peace. Yet they sharpened their blades. And so, he walked endlessly in their echoes, neither fully rejected nor fully embraced. His name both a curse and a prayer, on Olympus. The gods mocked him still. Athena, ever cold, called him reckless, a brute who brought ruin without wisdom. Zeus scolded him for his fury, even as Zeus himself unleashed storms upon mortals without hesitation. Hera pitied him but did not reach for him. And Aphrodite, radiant Aphrodite, held him in her arms but could not always still the thunder that rolled in his chest. So Ares returned to mortals. He returned not only because he was called, but because he understood them. Their restlessness was his own. Their longing was his own. And though they never saw the gentleness within him, though they cursed his name when the earth grew red, they were the closest reflection of his true self. There is a story told in whispers, of a night when a soldier lay dying in the mud of battle, his breath shallow, his eyes clouding with the mist of death. He felt a presence kneel beside him. He saw not a friend, not an enemy, but a figure vast and terrible, the god of war himself. Yet the god did not sneer, did not shout. Ares placed a hand upon the soldier's chest, and for a moment, the pain eased. For a moment, the soldier felt not fear, but calm, rest. The god whispered, his voice like distant thunder softening into rain. And the soldier's eyes closed, not in terror, but in peace. This, too, was the echo of wars. Not only the clash of steel, but the silence after. Not only the fire of rage, but the release of surrender. Ares was all of it, the fury, the longing, the final sigh. And perhaps that is why, though the gods mocked him, mortals remembered him. They built shrines not only in hope of victory, but in fear of loss, in honor of the strange, inescapable God who walked with them through their darkest hours. And so, when the night grows heavy and your heart recalls its own battles, the struggles you've fought, the wounds unseen, the fears you still carry, listen closely. For in the hush of darkness, the echo of Ares still moves, not to frighten, not to conquer, but simply to remind you that you are not alone, that every battle, every longing, every weary sigh has been heard before, and will be heard again. The echo fades into the rhythm of the waves, the rhythm of your breath, and slowly, the god of war himself fades, too, into the night, leaving behind not fire, but the soft memory of footsteps receding, the sound of echoes dissolving into silence. When the echoes of men quieted and the dust of battle fell back to earth like tired snow, Ares sought the oldest refuge he knew, the night. Not the night of taverns and torches, nor the night of conspirators whispering in shadowed rooms, but the high and holy night that stretched from horizon to horizon, an ocean of stars deeper than any sea. He would leave the clamor of Olympus without ceremony, descending not as a thunderbolt, not as a shout, but as a hush, cloak drawn, helm dimmed. He stepped onto lonely ridges where no temple stood, onto islands where seabirds folded their wings and slept, onto plains where the wind combed quiet grasses and forgot their names at dawn. Everywhere he went, he looked upward, and upward the sky replied, vast, patient, unafraid. It was there, beneath constellations older than the gods themselves, that Ares remembered how to breathe. The armor loosened, not by latch or strap but by something softer, a surrender that had nothing to do with defeat. He would lift his gauntlets, let them fall. He would draw the spear from his hand and lay it on the earth as a man might set down a burden at the threshold of home. And then he would simply be, no longer the storm summoned by mortal fear, but a figure of bronze and quiet, listening for the music that lies behind the world. The stars sang to him, not in melody as mortals know it, not in lyres or flutes, but in distances, pure, measured, immeasurable distances, chords of space held taut between burning points of light. He did not understand the language fully, but he knew it was not about conquest. It was about belonging. Each star where it must be. Each darkness exactly shaped to hold the light. He envied them, not for their brightness, but for their place, for their certainty. He would lie on his back in high meadows and watch the Pleiades drift like a handful of seeds cast across velvet. He would follow Orion's slow stride and wonder what hunts the hunter when wars are done. He would trace the winding spine of the Milky Way and feel, for a moment, that it was a river wide enough to carry even his unrest. Sometimes he spoke aloud to them all, the stars, the dark, the river of silver, using no name, asking no boon, only folding his voice into the fabric of night as a seam of warmth. Tell me, he would say to nothing and everything, what is fire for, if not to warm as well as burn? The night did not answer, but it did not refuse him either. It accepted his question, held it without judgment, and in that holding he found a strange relief. All Olympus gave him roles, sun, fury, blade. Mortals gave him names, terror, glory, doom. The night gave him nothing, no mask, no throne, and in that nothing there was room to breathe. On such a night, a shepherd boy once woke to find a tall figure seated upon a stone a short distance from his flock. The boy's first instinct was fear. He had heard old stories of spirits who stole sheep and storms that walked on legs. But the figure turned and the moon showed a face carved in patience, not in hunger. Sleep, said the figure. The voice was low, tired, kind. Your lambs will not wander. The boy slept. In the morning his flock remained, the ground untrampled, and upon the stone where the stranger had sat was a circle of dewless grass, as though a small, bright fire had rested there and gone. The boy told that story for years to those who would listen, and most did not. But the stars did. They had been listening all along. There were nights when Aphrodite found him in these high places. No trap, no net, only the quiet footfall of a goddess who knew when to leave desire unadorned. She would come without jewels, hair unbound, carrying no perfume but the salt of the sea that birthed her. They spoke little. They did not need words. She would sit beside him and tilt her head back until the sky filled her eyes. What do you see? She asked once. Measure, he said. Pattern. A promise that chaos is not all. And what do you want? He could have answered with any of the old ambitions: victory, honor, a temple wider than the horizon. Instead he said, a place to put my spear where it will not be needed. 16. She did not smile. She reached for his hand and held it as though it were both precious and ordinary. As though a god's hand could be no more and no less than a hand. Then let the night hold it, she whispered. And for a little while it did. When she left, as she always must, Aries did not curse her absence. He had learned the mathematics of loss, he knew how to subtract gently. He watched her vanish into the dark like a dawn that had changed its mind. And he turned back to the sky, faithful to a ritual that asked nothing and gave everything. If mortals passed near, they seldom saw him. And those who saw him seldom knew. A traveler would recall a figure far off on a ridge, motionless as a statue, and assume it a cairn. A fisherman would look up from mending his net to glimpse a glint on the headland and think of foxfire or moon-wet stone. To recognize a god is to be changed. The night, merciful teacher, let them go on unchanged. Aries welcomed that mercy. There had been enough revelation in his life, enough spectacle, enough names. The night allowed him anonymity. And in anonymity he found a tenderness he could not bear under the weight of worship. He learned, at last, how to be small, to share space with crickets, with owls, to let his footfalls respect the labor of spiders, to step around a flower rather than through it. His armor learned the lesson too and learned it gladly. Metal, which loves to be noticed, found a new dignity in restraint. On some nights he counted breaths instead of stars. The counting steadied him. Inhale, the world widens. Exhale, the world returns. Inhale, room for all griefs. Exhale, leave what you cannot carry. He discovered that even a god can be taught by darkness how to soften. The night is an archive of every quiet thing, and it lent him its wisdom as a librarian might lend a book, without charge, trusting the borrower to bring it back. He began to hear other silences nested within the great one overhead, the silence before a child falls asleep, the silence between two people who have forgiven each other, the silence in which a widow chooses to sing. These, too, were wars ended, little treaties written in breath and blood, unrecorded but binding. He honored them as surely as he had honored the bravery of soldiers. He stood as witness, invisible and vast, to victories no bard would ever sing. Sometimes, in those long vigils, the night showed him scenes from far countries, not visions summoned by prophecy, but simple truths visible to anyone who looks long enough. A woman lighting a lamp for her aging father, a mason smoothing the last roughness from a cornerstone, a sailor tying knots by feel after the torch has gone out. Human work, human love, the galaxies of the ordinary. He did not interfere. He watched, and in watching, was changed. On one such night, a meteor crossed the sky, bright, swift, absolute. It carved a stroke of fire through the dark and vanished. Aries rose to his knees without knowing why. His body answered to that bright grammar. The meteor said, begin and end cleanly. It said, burn without cruelty. It said, even flame can bless. He bowed his head as a student bows when he is shown a perfect solution to a problem that has troubled him for years. Dawn takes its time with the patient. It came to Aries not as a conquest but as a negotiation, first a paling, then the hint of blue, then the lovely scandal of birds. He did not hurry it. He let the stars recede at their chosen pace. Let constellations fold like tents after a pilgrimage. Often he stayed until the sun had fully lifted. Not because he loved day more than night, but because the day was the night's signature, the proof that the letter had been sent and received. He would take up his armor then. Not with reluctance but with respect. The sky had not changed what he was, only how he carried it. He strapped the greaves as a craftsman returns tools to their places. He took the spear not as a threat but as a vow, to keep its edges for the work that requires edges and to sheath it whenever gentler instruments will do. Before he left those summits and shores, he always offered the night a tithe, a memory he no longer needed, a fury he had finished, a sorrow he had finally named. He imagined them rising, small cinders, faint and faithful, joining the commonwealth of stars. Perhaps, he thought, that is what constellations are, not heroes, but relinquishments, not stories, but the places where stories end without noise. When at last he returned to Olympus, the halls did not mock him as loudly as before. Perhaps nothing had changed except his hearing. Mockery sounded to him now like a small thing, a jangle near a door, a hinge that needed oil. Hephaestus hammered, Athena debated, Hermes practiced lies elegant as swallows. Ares listened and answered as required. But his eyes contained distances. And distances have their own dignity. And when mortals called again, as they always did, he went. He went because it was his office, his mark upon the ledger of the world. But on those fields, amid the roars and ruptures, he kept the night inside him like water in a traveler's skin. He remembered the meteor, begin and end cleanly. He remembered the shepherd's sleep, the woman's lamp, the sailor's knots. He did not abolish the cruelty of war. No one god can cancel the stubborn arithmetic of human fear, but he refused to love cruelty. He refused to make a throne of it, under banners and under smoke. The stars were present even when unseen. Ares felt them as a pressure at the back of his eyes, as a rhythm steadier than drums. And sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, he put a hand upon a soldier's shoulder the way a father guides a son through a doorway. Enough for tonight. The touch would say, lay down, and a life would be spared. Not by miracle, not by law, but by the gentlest compromise between breath and flame. So the god of war, who had been called storm, learned to be weather. He passed, he watered, he spared, he struck where striking mattered and withheld where withholding would heal. At twilight he looked up and felt looked back at, not by judges but by participants, the stars, which are not pure onlookers but partners in any honest accounting of night. If you, listening now, have your own battles, a grief that fights to keep its ground, a fear that raids your sleep, you may lift your eyes in whatever room you lie and imagine the ceiling becoming sky. Imagine the constellations taking their places like friends who know your door. Think of Ares not as conqueror but as companion, not to rouse you, but to stand guard at the edge of your quiet. Spear planted, point down. A sentinel who has learned from darkness how to keep watch without waking what sleeps. And when sleep comes, because it will, let it come like starlight, arriving from a distance so faithful you forget it traveled. Let it find you in that wide, warm interval where even a god can set down his armor and be only a breathing thing among breathing things. The night will hold you as it held him, without question, without bargain, copper and silver, blood and milk, fire and tide. Above you, beyond you, the slow astronomy of tenderness continues. Below you, inside you, a quieter drum begins. Not the march of war, but the measure of rest. The god of war listens to it with you, and in that listening, both of you are gentled, he by your trust, you by his vigil, under the one sky that belongs to all who dare to look up and be small. And so the stars, which never hurry, dim by a fraction you cannot see. Another night completes its round. Another lesson, burn without cruelty, enters the ledger. Ares stands, gathers what must be gathered, and leaves what can be left. The spear remains light in his hand. The armor does not bite. And the sky, as always, is waiting for his return. Though the gods named him war, though mortals feared him as the red flame that devoured nations, Ares was not only destruction. Inside the furnace of his heart, there was another ember, one that glowed softly, refusing to be extinguished. It was the ember of protection, of care, of a fury that rose not to conquer, but to shield. This side of him was seldom spoken of. Bards preferred tales of spears flashing and fields drowning in cries. Yet in the quiet spaces, away from feasts and temples, there were whispers of another Ares, the defender, the guardian, the god whose wrath could be gentle as a hand placed on a trembling shoulder. He appeared most often where the weak had no champion. There was once a village by the edge of Thrace, nothing more than a cluster of clay huts and fields of barley that bent easily in the wind. Raiders came, greedy for grain, cruel for the sake of cruelty. The men of the village had gone to war, leaving only the elderly, the mothers, the children. The raiders expected no resistance. They marched in with fire and iron. But that night, as they neared the first hut, the air thickened. A shadow rose between them and the trembling villagers. Tall, armored, silent, his spear gleamed not with bloodlust, but with warning. The raiders laughed at first, until their torches dimmed, one by one, as though the night itself had swallowed the fire. They fled before striking a single blow. In the morning, the villagers found no trace of the raiders, only the imprint of great footsteps circling their homes, as if someone had stood guard all through the night. The old women whispered prayers of thanks to Ares, not as destroyer, but as protector. Another story tells of a shepherd girl who wandered too far into the hills, pursued by wolves hungry with winter. She clutched a stick, her heart breaking with fear. And then, the wolves stopped. Their eyes widened, their tails lowered. Behind the girl stood a figure, bronze gleaming, gaze unyielding. The wolves slunk away without a sound. The girl returned to her flock, and though she never spoke of it, her family noticed the strange peace in her eyes, as if she carried within her the memory of a god who had once walked at her side. These moments were not victories sung by poets. They were not etched in marble or told across amphitheaters. They were quiet mercies, uncounted and unpraised. Yet they mattered to Ares more than temples or offerings. For in them, he glimpsed what his fire could be when turned away from conquest, a shield instead of a blade, a light instead of a blaze. Aphrodite knew this side of him best. She saw it when he cradled her after the scorn of Olympus. His fury turned not outward, but inward, reshaped into tenderness. She saw it when he brushed tears from her face with fingers that had shattered armies but could hold her as gently as petals. "You are not only war," she told him once. He shook his head, bitter. "They will never believe that." "I do," she whispered. "And perhaps that is enough." Her words stayed with him. On nights when he heard the distant cries of mortals, when the call of war throbbed in his veins, he remembered, fury does not always destroy. Sometimes it protects. Sometimes it rescues. Sometimes it stands in silence between the innocent and the storm. So it became a rhythm in him, rage and rest, fire and ember, battle and protection. He answered both, because both lived in him. And if you listen, now, in your own quiet, you may feel it, that same shield of Ares extended to you. Not to rouse you, not to frighten, but to watch over you as you drift into the soft territories of sleep. Imagine his spear planted firmly in the ground beside your bed, its point downward, not as threat but as promise. Imagine his presence outside your door, steady as a mountain, untiring as a star. He is the sentinel who keeps your dreams safe from wolves you will never see. This is the gentle side of fury, a god, feared and mocked, yet capable of holding the night for you, keeping the silence whole, so that you may rest without fear. And as you breathe more slowly, sinking deeper into the rhythm of your own heart, know that his watch continues. The night wraps you as it once wrapped him, and the god of war himself grows quiet, standing guard not with roar, but with stillness. The gentle side of fury, eternal, unspoken, yet always near. When mortals slept, their bodies resting upon straw mats, upon wooden beds, upon the bare earth itself, their minds drifted into realms no walls could guard. And in those realms, Ares often walked, not by his own choosing, but because dreams are mirrors, and in every age, men and women carried him within them, the god of fury, the god of longing, the god of fire both feared and needed. Some dreamed of him as terror. They saw him striding across crimson fields, spear raised high, eyes blazing brighter than torches. In these dreams, his voice was thunder, his steps earthquakes. Soldiers trembled before him, and even kings fell to their knees. Such visions left the dreamer waking in sweat, heart racing as if chased by storms. They cursed his name and prayed to never see him again. Yet the more they prayed, the more often he returned, because their fear kept his image alive. Others dreamed of him as sorrow. They saw not a giant of bronze, but a lonely figure seated on a rock beside the sea. his head bowed, his spear laid aside, his eyes fixed upon the horizon as though waiting for someone who never came. These dreamers woke not with fear but with aching sympathy, whispering to themselves that even gods could be wounded, even gods could be alone. Such dreams softened their hearts, and they lit small lamps in his honor, not to summon him, but to comfort him, as though mortal fire could warm an immortal heart. Still others dreamed of him as protector. A child hiding from shadows saw Ares appear in armor that gleamed like the moon. He did not fight, he simply stood, and the shadows fled. A mother anxious for her son's return from battle dreamed of Ares laying a hand upon the boy's shoulder, guiding him home across dark fields. A farmer fearful of famine dreamed of Ares planting his spear in the earth, and from the wound in the soil, barley sprang golden and tall. These dreamers woke with calm, and they whispered thanks to the god whose fury had turned to shield. And then there were dreams stranger still. A scholar fell asleep over his scrolls and dreamed of sitting at a table across from Ares. No armor, no weapons, only a man of stern eyes and tired hands. They drank together in silence, and when the scholar woke, he felt he had been given wisdom without words. A singer once dreamed of walking a road where Ares marched beside him. Every step echoed like drums, and when he awoke, he composed a song so haunting that listeners wept without knowing why. In every dream, Ares was shaped not only by himself but by the dreamer. He was terror to the fearful, comfort to the weary, mystery to the wise, strength to the fragile. He did not resist these forms. Dreams are truths in disguise, and he accepted them as mirrors of how the world saw him. Yet within each dream, whether he stood blazing or broken, he left behind one quiet note, a reminder that he was not only war, not only rage. Some mortals understood. They began to tell tales of seeing Ares in sleep, not as a curse, but as a companion. Farmers, soldiers, mothers, poets, they spoke softly of him at night fires, daring to believe that the god who thundered on battlefields might also walk gently in dreams on Olympus. The other gods dismissed such tales. Athena scoffed, saying that wisdom, not war, should guide the dreams of mortals. Zeus thundered that mortals should not dare to imagine gods as wounded or gentle. But Aphrodite smiled, for she knew better. Dreams, she said, show what waking cannot. If they see him so, it is because some part of him longs to be seen so. And so Ares kept walking, not only through fields and seas, not only through halls of marble and clouds of Olympus, but through the labyrinth of sleeping minds. He entered huts of the poor and palaces of kings, tents of soldiers and cradles of infants. Wherever the veil of sleep descended, he could be found. And if you, tonight, find your own dreams touched by the sound of distant footsteps, do not fear. Perhaps it is Ares, passing quietly through the chambers of your mind. Perhaps he comes not with spear raised, but with a watchful gaze, ensuring that your night remains whole. Perhaps he kneels beside your bed, not to rouse you, but to whisper in a voice softer than the sea, rest. Your battles can wait for dawn, and when you wake, you may not remember his face, but you will carry the calm, the strange assurance that even gods walk in dreams, and that one of them, feared, mocked, misunderstood, once walked beside you, leaving behind not fire, but peace. The centuries turned like pages, and still Ares walked, through wars, through whispers, through the fragile dreams of mortals. Yet even gods grow weary, not weary in bone, for divinity does not break as flesh does, but weary in spirit. His fury had thundered for ages, his loneliness had echoed even longer, and so, slowly, he began to long for something no battle could give him, something even love could not anchor forever. Rest. It began with the sea. The Aegean had always been his companion, murmuring at the edge of his marches, singing beneath the cliffs of Olympus, foaming around the hulls of warships. But now, in the quiet of his wandering, he returned to the shore not for conquest, not for strategy, but for solace. The waves did not ask him to fight. The tides did not mock him. They simply arrived, receded, arrived again, patient, eternal, unafraid of his fire. He stood barefoot upon the sand, the cold foam licking at his feet, and felt something loosen inside him. His spear grew heavy, and he drove it into the earth, point down, not as a weapon but as a marker. Here, at the edge of sea and sky, even the god of war would lay down his arms. The nights grew longer, or perhaps he only noticed them more. He watched the constellations drift slowly above the water, mirrored in silver ripples. He thought of all the battles that had raged beneath those same stars. Battles that had burned brightly and then faded, leaving nothing but memory. The stars endured. The sea endured. He endured. Yet he wondered, must endurance always be a march? Could it not, perhaps, also be a rest? He began to imagine it, a rest without end. Not sleep as mortals know it, fragile and easily broken, but a deeper surrender, a quiet so vast it felt like returning to the breath before creation, a silence where his name was neither cursed nor praised, where his fire dimmed not into ash but into steady warmth. The thought of it soothed him more than any victory. Once, Aphrodite found him upon such a shore. She saw his armor cast aside, his helm resting like driftwood, his eyes soft as twilight. She touched his shoulder and whispered, "You look as though you are waiting for something." He answered not with thunder, but with stillness. "I am waiting," he said, "for the war inside me to fall silent." Her hand lingered, and she kissed his brow, salt mingling with salt, the seas upon his skin, hers upon his lips. "Even you deserve peace," she said. Then she left, for she belonged not to silence but to the endless tides of desire. But her words stayed with him, circling like gulls above the waves. And so he listened more closely, not to armies, not to shouts, but to the sea. In the crash of breakers, he heard a lullaby. In the sigh of receding foam, he heard a promise that even storms find their harbor. Even fire learns to glow instead of blaze. Mortals, too, began to whisper of it. Fishermen spoke of a tall figure seen far down the coast, seated upon a rock, his gaze fixed not on them but on the horizon, shepherds told of waking at dawn to find strange footprints in the sand, leading into the sea and vanishing where the waves began. They did not fear these signs. They said, "The god is resting. Let him be." And so they did, leaving offerings of shells, flowers, bread, not for the battle, but for blessing. It was here, in these final wanderings, that Ares discovered what rest could mean. It was not surrender. It was not defeat. It was the gentlest victory, to choose quiet when all the world expected thunder. Sometimes, he closed his eyes and imagined eternity as an endless shore. No spears, no chains, no laughter of mocking gods. Only the tide, forever breathing, and the stars, forever watching. In that eternity, he was not god nor warrior. He was simply presence, simply flame turned to ember, steady and soft. Perhaps this is how he will endure when all temples crumble, when even Olympus fades into memory, not as the roar of war, but as the hush that follows, not as terror, but as rest, the eternal rest. And if you, tonight, feel the weight of your own battles, listen to the sea within you, the slow inhale, the slow exhale. Imagine laying down your armor as he did, planting your spear in the sand and stepping away. Imagine the tide covering your footprints, erasing the march, leaving only calm. For the god of war has already walked ahead of you, and he waits now, seated upon the eternal shore, watching the stars, listening to the waves. He is no longer furious, no longer mocked, no longer chained. He is simply at rest, and in his rest, he invites you into yours. So breathe, so release, so sleep. Our journey has wandered far, from the first fire of Ares' birth, through his lonely marches, the chains of forbidden love, the echoes of war, the dreams of mortals, and finally to his eternal rest upon the shore beneath the endless stars. Now, as the story comes to its close, you too have reached the quiet end of your path tonight. No more clash of swords, no more heavy footsteps, no more chains or mocking laughter. Only silence remains, a tender stillness wrapping around you like the soft blanket of the universe. Let your body release everything, your shoulders lighter, your heart beating slower, steadier, like the distant rhythm of waves upon the shore. Each breath you take in fills you with peace. Each breath you release carries away your worries, your burdens, your weight. Imagine Ares now, no longer the raging god of war, but a silent guardian standing at the edge of your dream. His spear planted into the ground, point downward, not to threaten, but to promise that nothing will disturb your sleep. He stands there, still and watchful, gazing at the sky, so that you may drift deeper, safely, into your own world of rest. Listen to the whisper of the sea, to the sigh of the night wind, to the fading footsteps of a god who has chosen rest. Together, they weave a lullaby, carrying you gently, softly, like a small boat drifting upon calm waters. Sleep is already arriving, layer by layer, like mist descending upon a quiet valley, your eyes heavy, your thoughts fading, not into fear, but into warmth, into safety, into surrender. And as you drift away, remember, even Ares, the god of fire and blood, found a place of stillness at last. So you too are worthy of rest. Tonight, and in every night of peace that follows. Sleep now, deeply, sweetly, peacefully. May you have a gentle, complete, and healing good night.